This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis, outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
Good morning. I'm Gord Long with GordonTLong.com, and I have with me this morning, again, Ty Andros, for the second time here this week, is no stranger to many of our listeners. Ty is the president of TraderView, publisher of the TEDBits website, and writer and editor of his well-recognized and very popular newsletter, TEDBits. Good morning. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Gord.
Ty, this is, as you well know, the second part in our three-part series this week on crony capitalism. I encourage all our listeners who haven't already to review the three-part series Ty and I did during his last visit on the fallacies of reported economic growth, specifically what's really flawed in the GDP, and a four-part series Ty and I did during his prior visit on financial repression. We've received just outstanding feedback on them, so I encourage our listeners to revisit them. Ty, before we begin, I just need to quickly take care of some mechanics. We have slides to guide our conversation as usual, and I would ask our listeners to open the slides to full screen viewing. You need to open the slides to view them properly and to see the detail we'll be discussing. I get a lot of emails from people saying they're not able to see the detail, and it's because you haven't opened them to full screen viewing. You can do that on both the SlideShare and the new YouTube facility that we're using. Both have an icon in the bottom right corner that by clicking it will open the slides to full screen viewing. Additionally, there's a box where you can make comments and ask questions, and Ty and I encourage you to add anything that you would like there because we value your feedback and your questions. Like I said, I want to just launch right into this morning as a follow-on from our first session, so we don't run out of time. And I have an example of crony capitalism because we said we were going to kind of take this and build it around an example, and we chose Dodd-Frank.
Well, it's just a perfect and prime example of crony capitalism. The public was told that they reformed the financial system to take too big to fail off the table. Actually, this is it expands too big to fail by multiples, and it really is a crony capitalist support act, and it is very much like the tax code in that it will never be defined. They are always going to be selling rules and regulations. It's millions of words now, which we'll see, but it'll always be expanding because those are what I'm going to call the base laws. And then the rest of it is written by, unaccountable bureaucrats in Washington. And Dodd-Frank is nothing more than protecting the dinosaurs from their own mistakes and sending the bill to the public. These people are insidious. The new growth I'm going to call it the spring growth that needs to come along behind these people and replace them and create a productive society and new waves of wealth are short-circuited. And so, it's really short-circuiting the future. That's how socialists work, and whether anybody wants to believe it or not, we now live in a socialist progressive society. And everything is planned by people that are in control in the state capitals and the federal government, and they're working hard to transfer the public wealth to themselves, and they're doing a good job of it. But this one is just it's breathtaking in its scope and its reach, and it's just one little example of it because it doesn't matter whether you're looking at Health and Human Services or Homeland Security or the Commerce Department. Those are all crony capitalist, I'll call it government regulators and lawmakers. And their job is to create what I'll call government dependence, whether it be the public or companies. And the people inside of those different segments of our economy are, to be sold. Okay, when you're doing business in any one of those areas, that is something that wants to be sold by, I'll call it a rent seeker. And the rent seeker is the federal government or the state government or the municipal government. And so they see all of these different things that the public has to have, and then they create rules and regulations that steer that business to their respective campaign supporters. But I really wanted to cover Dodd-Frank because Dodd-Frank is a monster. It's a python. It's wrapping itself around the United States, and it is going to squeeze that system. And ultimately, it squeezes it to the point of its own death. And, it's not only going to kill the public, it'll end up being dead itself. And, but I thought this was a perfect example of it. I really didn't want to go into Obamacare. It's just too controversial right now. But the Obamacare is, really actually only got one thing in mind, and that is to put the private sector insurers out of business so people fall into the hands of government dependency.
The list, Ty, is that we could go in is phenomenal, and I laid out quite a number of them in my thesis paper this year. But a couple points I'd make on this excellent slide, as you show here, Crony Capitalists, you just picked we're talking about an example within one complex, the financial complex. There are a whole raft of other complexes, ever mind issue we could get into, and that's the military-industrial complex and what they're doing. There's the securities complex, and that is, call it homeland defense, but really this massive explosion of secrecy and security structure that's going on in America. And I lay out the various fire complex, the various complexes that are exploding where crony capitalists are now feeding off the system. And for the reasons we outlined in our first session. Second point I'd make, and I'm kind of smiling here, I'm looking at the little cartoon of Dodd and Frank selling snake oil. And but what's really, and I remember when we first saw that little graphic, Ty, we were doing our Global Insights series. That's probably well over a year ago, and we were pretty upset about what Dodd-Frank was doing. But a couple points on it itself is that both these guys are now gone, right? Dodd's gone. Barney Frank, he's now retiring. And now the big payday begins. And I mean, I don't know how much money, but you're going to see some very wealthy people coming out of this. And I was thinking back of a lot of the things that we've had. And, Phil Gramm, remember Phil Gramm, who was head of the banking committee in 1997, 98, when we had the whole banking restructuring that allowed the reversal of the bill that separated insurance companies from banks and reversed it, which put us into this explosion in securitization. And a lot of these people who passed these major bills then suddenly disappear, but then surface very well off. I think you were commenting earlier about what Dodd is doing right now.
Oh, yeah, he's moved on to be the chairman of the Motion Pictures Association, and he's making tens of millions of dollars. And, of course, Barney's headed that way. Bill Clinton, really didn't have any wealth. Al Gore didn't have any wealth until they sold something in government and then retired to their paydays. And, of course, it happens over and over again, whether it be Robert Rubin or Phil Gramm and.
Well, I was looking at Newt Gingrich during his presidential nomination. And they were showing that he was well north of $30 million. Here's a poor,
college professor,
barely tenured college professor that got into politics. He's never had anything other, and I don't know about you, but I don't think you kind of put $30 million together teaching university. And he's been a professional politician. Now, how exactly do you get $30 million?
Well, you know how to put in $1 million into government and get out $1 billion.
Well, apparently you just have to be a unbelievably good investor. And I'll tell you, Ty, I've been working at this my entire life, and $30 million in pure just making investments is a full-time job to be able to pull that off. But he was able to do it after work.
He's an expert at it, Gord.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't want to accuse anybody because I just don't understand it. That's the only point I'd make. And it's such a consistent pattern that I would challenge you to find anybody who's led some of these major changes where we put up moats and created regulations that somehow later on weren't independently wealthy. There's something wrong here.
Well, the public's not stupid. That's why Congress has a 10% approval rating. It's because people recognize what's going on and how the system works. And Washington and the state capitals are focus points of corruption.
Well, there was a big debate going on here earlier this year where they felt it was wrong that politicians should be allowed to do insider trading, that the politicians were in fact making a lot of money on knowledge that they had. I thought that was illegal, but apparently it required a lot of debate in Congress and changing a bill to stop it. I mean, hello, when did that ever, when was ever that allowed?
Well, it's illegal if you're in the private sector.
Yeah, right.
If you're in the public sector, it's legal. It's just like you don't have the same health insurance they do. Okay, it just, these people have passed laws that, immunize them against the corruption that they're practicing.
It does lead to the question that Ty says, if it's at that state where we allow that, there are no restrictions anymore. So how could you not have even crony capitalism running rampant in Washington?
Well, a good example, look at Jon Corzine. Jon Corzine led to the largest fraud in the commodities markets. Gord, I've been in the business for 30 years. I've never seen segregated accounts fail, ever. I mean, I've seen lots of brokerage failures like MF Global, but the customer money never was lost. I mean, just think back to Revco 4 or 5 years ago. The customer money was still intact, and that went into the wrong kind of bankruptcy. But last but not least, Corzine's out there bundling millions of dollars for Obama, and coincidentally enough, the regulators and the Justice Department haven't questioned him or any of the management.
So how many people have been indicted?
None. And, of course, they're not going to, because they know if they ask the questions, they're going to find the answers. And there's just some excellent stuff. I mean, they were going to pass a rule, and he went up there and stopped it. It would have saved every MF Global customer. He went and visited his buddy Gary Gensler, and that rule was short-circuited. I've seen some comments from Bart Chilton, and he said, we were ready to stop all this, and all of a sudden it was buried. But anyway, let's go to the next slide, Gord. This is important because this is what's happening. And it's really happening in all sectors of our world, but we're just going to, focus on the financial. First, a quote by Franklin Roosevelt, which is, "In politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way." And, of course, that's what the 2,400 pages of Dodd-Frank is.
Isn't that a great quote, Kai? That is so true, and we're all so naive to it, that what we hear about and what finally we're made aware of is well-planned and well-orchestrated. And
then we have a quote from Tacitus, who was a leader and thinker during the Roman Empire. And the more corrupt the state, the more it legislates. And then we have something from 1887, Lord Acton. And power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And, of course, that's the definition of Washington, D.C. And, of course, note from 2009 to 2010, progressive Democratic supermajorities could pass legislation without any support from their Republican colleagues, and they did. Obama has been the greatest wrecking ball to your freedoms that you can even imagine. It was the Chicago way. He went up there and he sold things to the unions. He sold things to business. He sold things to the financial industry, and it all came out as legislation, supposedly to protect the public. But no, I will tell you, it was legislation to put the public in chains. And then, of course, here's Rahm Emanuel, the current mayor of Chicago, but he was also Obama chief of staff in 2008, and a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And since we were having one at that time, they used it to extend their oppression of the public.
Ty, comments on Rahm Emanuel now as the mayor of Chicago and anything that you've seen that really reflects taking this kind of crony capitalism to the state level?
Well, actually, I've been surprised with Rahm. Daley left before the collapse, and Rahm is arriving just as the collapse is going to happen. I just moved out of Chicago, Gord, literally several days ago, and I'm out of Illinois. I'm not going to be on the scene. It is Athens unfolding as we speak. The whole state of Illinois is as bankrupt as California, both morally and fiscally. Last year, they passed a doubling of the tax of corporations and individuals, and took it to, literally anybody making more than $50,000. And all of that money, Gord, not one of it went to fund state activities. Literally, the whole extra $7 billion has gone to public sector trade unions, which are their contributors, and the ones that have put them in power and hold them in power and turn out the vote, because Illinois is nothing more than a something-for-nothing society. And a something-for-nothing society is what the West has become. And they have driven the public into desperation, and that's why nobody can survive any kind of re-elections, because the public knows something's wrong. They're desperate, and they're acting in fear. And fear is a powerful motivator. And we really, Gord, he's there for one reason: to preside over the collapse and to gather more power.
That's amazing, Ty. The same scenarios, whether we're talking any countries in Europe or around the world, whether we're talking U.S. federal, we take it down to the state level. Here we're at a city discussion. There's just a consistent set of issues that we find with the degree of corruption and the degree, frankly, of crony capitalism going on. I don't want to get off topic, Ty, but you just had the NATO meeting in Chicago, and I know just before you left you had some concerns with what you're witnessing then that some of our listeners may be interested in.
Well, Gord, it was just the police state being turned on. As you well know, they've already done all the legislation. They just really haven't informed the public, and so they turn these policies on and off. The Patriot Act's a good example. It was written in the early 90s. It wasn't written as a response to 9/11. It was written and then honed down, and then they just put it on the shelf and were ready to pull it out to take your freedom. And it was like a police state. And it was a police state. I mean, they had literally the black helicopters out there. They had troops. They had armies of police. They outlawed public demonstrations. They put in place laws that said you can't demonstrate if the Secret Service is present. And of course, who would know if the Secret Service is present? Would they, Gord? That's why they call it the Secret Service. Okay.
The ultimate oxymoron there, right?
Yeah. So in other words, you could be in violation of the law and not even know it, have no desire to be in violation of the law, but they can just slap you in jail.
Yeah, and they've changed the law to where mens rea, where they had to show that you had knowledge and intent of breaking a law. And even if you'd broken one, but if you had no intent, then you weren't found guilty. But now that's changed. Most of the law is now coming out. No, there is no mens rea, which means, in fact, you break it, doesn't make any difference. But here's a perfect example where you don't even know the secret security's there.
Oh, Gord, we're going to see here in a minute where I've detailed it very clearly how they have wrapped everybody in a cocoon of laws, and they just if you become, I'll call it, an enemy of the state, they're just going to pick out whatever statutes they need to put you in jail. Let's take a look. I've put together an example of crony capitalism and a list of I'll call it the payoffs, and of course they call them campaign contributions. Okay, when it's in a foreign country, they call it bribery. But here it's just got a different definition, but it's exactly the same activity. The reason they want to outlaw bribery is because then you have to go to the politicians and you're forced to go through their channels. But let's just take a look at the top of the list here, Gord. And this shows a source of funds here for Goldman Sachs, $3,964,000. 24% to Democrats and 55% to Republicans. They play both sides of the aisle. I'm sure in 2008 those numbers were reversed because they could see a Democratic sweep coming. They, like I said, they play both sides of the aisle, but they always try to bias the group that they believe are directly ascending into power. And of course, that happens, they swing from one side to the other, but the political parties really, Gord, are all progressives. We talked about Phil Gramm, and Phil Gramm's a Republican, but you can talk about Dodd. He's a Democrat, but they're really statists and socialists. And I call them the Gaudis and the Gambinos. And the Gaudis and Gambinos fight turf wars known as elections to see who gets the front row, screwing the public. But there's no difference. Okay, I mean, that's why, if you run from one to the other, it's just like less evil. And people are so fearful and so desperate that they just keep looking for a new solution, but neither one is offering it. They're just different versions of the other. In other words, their constituencies. Labor is a little bit heavier constituency in the Democrats, and, the banking system is the province of the Republicans. So, although with Dodd-Frank, we saw that it's also the province of the Democrats. So it's really no difference. But really, the idea here is, how do they do it? How much are they putting in, which is nothing? Okay, I mean, just think of Goldman Sachs. They put in $3.9 million. And Goldman Sachs is littered throughout the government, whether it be Gary Gensler, which I spoke about before. He was Goldman Sachs, or Bill Dudley, the head of the New York Fed, or Tim Gaithner, ex-Goldman Sachs, actually the head of the ex-New York Fed president. But, we've got Goldman Sachs littered throughout the government. And, of course, they're guiding policies which directly benefit their previous organizations, and they, just like those politicians, will retire to cushy jobs. And let's go to the next slide, Gord, and just break down a little bit of Goldman Sachs. And you can see the contributions, and we show PACs, and we show soft money, and we show direct campaign contributions, and we can show who they gave it to. Look at that, Jon Corzine, right there, top contributors. Now we know why John's not being indicted or questioned. Daniel Cook, Christine Todd Whitman, Eugene Fife. Okay, we know who these contributors are, and wow. It's just amazing what's going on here. The amount of money spent on lobbying, and look at how it grows with every election cycle. And of course, that's funny money too.
I was just listening the other night to an interview with one of the major lobbyists in Washington, just finished getting out of prison for 4 years. And now he can talk freely, and he was talking about how Washington really works. And I'm looking at your slides here, Ty, and his comment was that it's not really about all the money that's transpiring, though there's huge amounts. That's not where the real influence and power comes from. A lot of it comes from, an example would be commitment of jobs after your term. So if you're a federal employee and you have the ability to influence something, or maybe to a lesser degree the politicians, when your term is up, there's a job offer. And these job offers are jobs that pay huge, huge salaries and bonuses. So if you're a government employee and you're making, you're fairly influential and you're making maybe $150,000, you're a lawyer at the Securities and Exchange, your next job is to go over to Goldman and be a lawyer there for $3 million a year. Now, how hard, who do you think you're trying to impress on a daily basis? The taxpayer? Or the legal counsel over at Goldman Sachs, who you think is your future job, unless you want to aspire to get another $10,000 raise if you do a really good job and there's no budget cuts.
Well, just think of all the people at J.P. Morgan. If you don't think that those people that literally, and I mean the SEC and the Fed and all those groups are literally have offices in J.P. Morgan's offices. At the same time, J.P. Morgan's doing lots of shenanigans. And it's because their compliance is looking, the regulatory compliance is looking the other way, knowing that their next job will be on the other side of the office hall.
Exactly. Tai, I don't think a lot of our listeners fully appreciate how the system actually works. Let me give you a quick example. You go into the Securities and Exchange and you got a conflict. So let's pick on a bank. So a bank's on one side of the table. And they've got a hard position they're trying to defend or influence. And of course, on the other side of the table, you got Securities and Exchange. Now, who's sitting on the Securities Exchange? There's probably the chief of that department, and he's been there 5 or she's been there 5 or 6 years. Maybe she's making $180,000. Beside her or she's got maybe 2 lawyers who've got a year, 2 years, maybe making $60,000, $90,000. And they're going to argue with that experience, that position. On the other side of the table, you've got 3 or 4 lawyers and specialists, maybe additionally outside counsel brought in. These lawyers are making $1 million, $2 million or higher a year. They probably 25 years ago had the same job across the table as these junior lawyers.
Exactly.
And they have forgotten more about those laws than the Securities and Exchange lawyers actually have yet to learn. So you're this junior guy, and you know you're gonna argue. You open your mouth and you get just literally beat up. So you're sitting there saying, I know I'm gonna get beat up. I can't begin to argue it. I don't have enough. I can't prepare enough. And not only that, where is my future? I'd rather be sitting on that side of the table. You get into that kind of environment. People are human beings. I'm sitting in an apartment because I never can afford a house in Washington at this salary that I'm currently getting. I've got incredible disposable income. I'm trying to pay back student loans that I've still got. Think of the realities of the world. I mean, it's pretty hard to sit there and decide I'm doing this for moral rights and what's right and wrong after a year or 2 years, isn't it, Ty?
Gord, it's just sickening. And of course, they prey upon the small firms. The big firms, they don't even go into really to do any regulation. They go to the small firms where there is no one across the table that can challenge them. And of course, the small firms are where the superior products and services the future superior products and services should come from. But they get strangled in the crib.
Exactly.
So that this business can flow to the Goldman Sachs or flow to the Morgan Stanleys or flow to the Merrill Lynch's or the Bank of America's or the J.P. Morgan's. The key to crony capitalism is strangling your hardy competitors, which give more for less and serve their customers more because they have to. Either they compete or they die.
Ty, and how the strangulation takes all sorts of forms. And how effectively you can do it. I'll jump back to this example I was giving with this meeting at a Securities and Exchange. The way you strangle that is then you turn around, if you're the Goldman, you walk out. Now you bring the political element down on the Securities and Exchange. So suddenly these people who are trying to do the right thing, they get pressure from above and they get literally neutered from the politicians who've got another set of motives.
Well, that's what happened with that law that would have stopped MF Global's collapse.
Exactly.
They were going to outlaw internal repos. And rather than Jon Corzine, rather than acquiesce, went to the top guy at the CFTC, and all of a sudden that whole initiative, which had been years in the making, was shelved.
So see, what happens is people who really want to do the right are neutered. they do the right thing. No matter where they turn, they're getting hit because people can play the system so effectively against them.
If they can't deal with the regulator across the table, they'll just deal with his boss.
Right. That's what they do. And his boss's boss, the politicians. And they bring, so that you're in a no-win, or then there's other ways. They absolutely put people in a position where they're so frustrated they just want out of the process. And of course, these other people are there year after year, and the people within government are continuously coming and going, whether administration or even public administrators.
Well, let's go now show this last slide for this session. And this is a very, very informative slide because it goes back, to 1956. And we can see the explosion in government. Government used to be 2 or 3% of the United States, but it also shows, something that we'll probably never again see in our lifetimes until after the collapse. And that is Ronald Reagan. Reagan was never supposed to be elected. He was elected from outside the Tweedledee, Tweedledum system. And he went in there and he absolutely look at how regulations were literally cut by over a third during Reagan's term. Combine that with redoing all the tax system, getting rid of all the loopholes and specialist interests. Those two things, taxes and regulation. Remember, Crony Capitalism works through taxes and regulation. And by rolling back both of them, we had a renewal in this country that lasted 20 years. And that was Reagan's gift. It was the gift of freedom. The gift of being able to, benefit from your own labor. The gift of not being put out of business because you came up with a better idea. And so, as human nature would have it, people went to work. They went to work very hard. And, of course, they were rewarded for their hard work. And, of course, right now they're working as hard as they can to, get rid of any rewards for hard work. They want to encourage, discourage any kind of what I'll call common sense wealth creation. And they kill it. Okay, I mean, productivity is critical to fiat money systems. If you don't think you're going to get repaid from a fiat money system, that's how they die. And if you can't create wealth, well, how do you pay off unpayable debts? And that's why and as they kill the growth through their, I'll call it regulations and taxes, they have to turn to a printing press because there's certainly the tax receipts are not coming. But this is a very good illustration. And it shows the crony capitalism. But as you can see, that trend line that I put in there, the face of crony capitalism. And you can see where it's going. And, I expect by the end of this year, we'll be up there at that 750,000 pages. That's a trend line, as you can well see. But do we have really anybody that's going to attack this? No. It's now just who's the least evil. I mean, there's nobody that votes for anybody anymore. They vote against it just depends. If you're a something for nothinger, then you are voting for the crony capitalists and government. If you want to take something, the Bible says thou shalt not steal. Well, now it's thou shalt not steal unless it's at the point of a government gun. So they kind of absolve themselves of the dirty work. But this is nothing more than theft and creeping socialism, totalitarianism. It's why those pinheads in Brussels and Washington, D.C. and Springfield, Illinois, those people have never worked in the private sector. They don't know what it takes to thrive and be productive and produce more than you consume and get people to buy you. They can only do it with a law, which is basically misusing government power. But this is a powerful example of it, and it's right in your face.
Ty, we're well past our hard line. We're going to have to wrap here for today. Some great slides, and I thank you for very much for bringing them. We're going to be back in another couple of days to do our third session here on Crony Capitalism. Any last comments you'd like to make, and how our listeners could learn more about your site, your writings, and the work you're engaged in?
Well, tedbits.com and Tedbits newsletter is an Austrian, it's through the lens of Austrian economics, which is really my cup of tea. I'm a hardline Austrian. There's lots of people that say they're Austrian, but they're not, and they don't do their homework. I mean, the idea of being able to see and predict but not be able to invest is, you didn't get to the final stage. And I help people put together absolute return alternative investments, which I believe can preserve and build your investments during this episode we're going through. And this episode is far from over, Gord. As you well know, we've got years and years of money printing in front of us, trillions. But the opportunities are as great as the crisis. And tedbits.com, myself, are dedicated to bringing the information necessary for people to protect themselves and to actually thrive in what's unfolding. And as you well know, there's a 20-80 rule. And 20% of the people out there are going to gather up probably 80% of the world, but 80% of the wealth of the world. But what most people don't know is that the powers that be are mostly applied Austrian economics, which we'll get into in another session. But they know that it's real things producing real wealth. Okay, and we've covered that before. But anyway, it's a very interesting period. I've done a lot of homework, and I'm dedicated to bringing it to others and helping them with their investments.
See you in 2 days.
Thank you for having me.
Talk to you later. Bye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.